Okay, kids, today we're going to discuss subjunctive and adjectival clauses, and this is the last of our subjunctive usage videos. The first thing is we have to explain what is an adjectival or adjective clause, also known as a relative clause. Adjective clauses have a subject and a verb. They will start with a relative pronoun like that, who, whom, whose, or which, or a relative adverb like why or where and when. Basically, adjective clauses function as an adjective in modifying nouns and pronouns. They are also called relative clauses. So basically, an adjective or a relative clause is a group of words that describe a noun. They are only a part of the sentence. They are a clause. I have a car that goes really fast. That goes really fast describes the car. Okay, because it's describing the car, it is an adjective clause. And you notice the introduction of the clause with the word that, which in Spanish is going to be, of course, que, which is very important for us to use with the subjunctive. The subjunctive is used in Spanish in adjective clauses when the antecedent, and the antecedent is a fancy grammar term, it means the noun being described. For instance, the car, in the example we saw in the previous slide, is not specific or doesn't exist. And it sounds rather obscure, but it's actually quite easy. What you have to decide is, based on the context of the sentence, is the noun that's being described in the adjective clause, is that noun existent or non-existent? And there'll be different clues and triggers that will help you figure that out, which I will explain in the future slides. So you have to decide whether or not that noun that's being described in the adjective clause exists or does not exist. If it is not specific or doesn't exist, we will use the subjunctive. If it exists or it is specific, we will use the indicative. Let's start with some examples here. Busco una casa que blank una piscina grande. I'm looking for a house that has a pool. Based on the context of this sentence, does that house exist? And the answer is no, it doesn't. Okay, we're not sure. I'm looking for a house that has a pool. It doesn't say this house exists. It doesn't say we found this house, etc. It says we're looking for a house that has a big pool. So based on the context of this sentence, this house may not exist. Therefore, we need to use the subjunctive. You really need to read the sentences for what they say and not what you think. Obviously, there's houses out there with big pools, but according to the sentence, that particular house may be non-existent, so we need to use the subjunctive. Versus number 2, ayer compramos una casa que, and we could use tiene here, or tenía. Yesterday we bought a house that had or has a big pool. This is not going to be the subjunctive, it's the indicative. We bought this house. It exists. So therefore, we want to use the indicative tense and not the subjunctive. We already bought the house, therefore we know the pool, the pool and the house, they exist. You may come up with some crazy sentences here like, I have a duck that is blue. If you were putting that sentence in Spanish, that would be the indicative tense because you have the duck. I know it's strange for a duck to be blue, but if you say you have it, then that means that that duck exists. So you need to read the sentences for what they say and not necessarily what you think. Here are some more examples. Conozca a una persona que blank in Nueva York. Is this person being described existent or non-existent? And the answer is they're existent. I know a person that lives in New York. Vive, we want to use the indicative tense. This personal a here tells us that this person being described exists, plus you know them. You got to look at the nature of the verb. Quiero encontrarme con una persona que blank in Nueva York. I would like to meet a person that lives in New York. Does this person exist? Well, we're really not sure at this point. So we're going to use a subjunctive, viva. Okay, I want to meet a person that lives in New York. You haven't met them yet, so they may not exist. We want to use subjunctive. And some final examples. No hay nadie que comprender esto. There isn't anyone that understands this. Now, sometimes these sentences can actually throw kids for a loop, but they're really the easiest ones. There isn't anyone that understands this. Well, if there isn't anyone, that means that they don't exist. So therefore, we need to use the subjunctive. That one's just laying it out there for you. Comprenda. Buscamos el conejo que blank lento. We're looking for the rabbit that runs slowly. We're looking for the, being the keyword, rabbit. This tells us that this rabbit exists and that we want to use the indicative tense. And I'm going to get into that on the next slide, why that happens. One thing you want to familiarize yourself with here, as you can see in example number 5, are these indefinite negative words. Okay, ningún, nadie, nada, none, no one, nothing. You also have to realize that in Spanish, the use of the double negative is common and encouraged. In English, we do not use double negatives. I ain't doing nothing. We don't speak like that. However, in Spanish, we use double negatives, and you can almost think of it as a multiplication problem, that a negative times a negative is a positive. So the two negatives will cancel each other out when translating, and it'll become a positive. There isn't anyone that understands this. We don't say, there ain't nobody that understands this. We say, there isn't anyone that understands it. So when you translate it, you have to make sure that you turn one of the negatives into a positive so that you can understand it in English. But the use of the double negative, very common in Spanish. Okay, some quick tips for you that help you to identify whether the noun being described in the adjectival clause exists or does not exist. If the antecedent, or the word that's being described, is a person, and it is indefinite, there will be no personal so you can use the subjunctive. You can see examples 3 and 4 for that. I know a person that lives in New York versus I want to meet a person. You'll notice in the example where it says I know a person, there's a personal in there. Okay, so when you have a personal the person exists. So you would use the indicative. If you don't have a personal the person is non-existent, and we would use the subjunctive. If the article is definite, el, la, los, or las, it refers to a specific thing. We're going to use the indicative. Looking for the rabbit that runs really fast. Okay, this rabbit exists. Versus indefinite articles, indefinite being the key word, un, una, unos, or unas, those are going to be more indicative of the subjunctive because the object being described is indefinite. It may not exist. The other thing that I will advise you as a tip, a major tip, is to make sure you look at the verb that's being used. I have a house versus I'm looking for a house. If you have it, then you know it exists. If you're looking for it, it may not exist. So you kind of have to use the nature of the verb in the independent clause in the first part of the sentence to help you decide whether or not that thing that is being described exists or does not exist. A couple final pieces here to adjectival clauses is very simple. Are the quiera words. Quiera, when it's added to the end of the word in Spanish, is the English equivalency of ever. So we have words like donde quiera, quien quiera, cuando quiera, cual quiera, wherever, whoever, whenever, whatever. It's like a bad Shakira song, right? Anytime you have a quiera word plus que, it is always followed by the subjunctive in Spanish, okay? Te seguiré donde quiera que vayas. I'll follow you wherever you may go, wherever you go. Quien quiera que sea, dile que se vaya. Whoever it is, tell them to leave, etc. So you notice this one actually has a double subjunctive. This is a nominal clause right here describing this noun with the verb decir. It's an imposition of will. So I kind of like that. It's a double subjunctive in there. But whenever you have a quiera word plus que, you always use the subjunctive in Spanish. You don't even really have to think about it. It's an automatic, so it's very easy to do. The very last piece here of subjunctive and adjectival clauses is there are expressions in Spanish. It's the word por, followed by an adjective or an adverb plus que. And basically it means however or no matter. It depends on the nature of the sentence. Once you have por plus the adjective or the adverb plus que, you're always going to follow that up with the subjunctive. Por rico que sea, no ofrece nada a nadie nunca. No matter how rich he is, he never gives anything to anyone. Por rápidamente que huya, la policía lo detendrá. However fast he flees, the police will stop him. So, por inteligente que seas, siempre haces cosas estúpidas. No matter how smart you are, you always do stupid things. So every time it's por plus an adjective or an adverb plus que, and then we use the subjunctive immediately afterwards, an automatic. In the interest of time, I've left you some practice. You notice you have some indefinite expressions at the top, and then at the bottom you have your key eta words and your pour plus your adjective plus your adverb examples. Don't have time to go over all of them because the videos are only allowed to be so long, but you can try these 17. They're available on Don Carlos 123.tripod.com, and I've put the answers onto the next page for you, or the next slide, so you can check to see how you've done. And here are the answers to the 17 questions on the previous page, again, available on doncarlos123.tripod.com. Also, as always, they have great examples of subjunctive and adjectival clauses on Colby Spanish Grammar. And if you have any other questions about subjunctive in general or subjunctive and adjectival clauses, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to help.